Okay, so let's start up over here. So as we know, we are in the middle, and we're going to try to make a lot of nice, headroad today in the sugya of Kabbalah, so mitzvos and Geros, and in particular in Ger Katan. Yesterday we saw, what's just to focus ourselves right now, a chiddush that the Ritva brought, where the Ritva sounded like he was saying by us in our sugya that there's no Kabbalah so mitzvahs by the Ger Katan, but in general it's not ma'akev, so it doesn't really matter, incredibly much that we can't do the Kabbalah's own mitzvahs over here. Okay, sounds like a chiddush. The Tosas Yeshanim had said, right, that it's only necessary to have Kabbalah's own mitzvahs when it's efshar, when it's possible to do. When it's possible to do the way we learned in the Tosas Yeshanim yesterday, it's ma'akev. You 100% need it, and it prevents the gators from being chal. But if it's a low efshar, he says, so then not. Now we understood that to mean, by virtue of the fact that the Tosas Yeshanim added the line that mago b'yayin kasher, that the chiddush that he's trying to speak out is that if it's not efshar, like for example, the child is he's a katan, he's a kid, and he doesn't have das to make a proper, actual, legit Kabbalah's or mitzvos, that's fine, but he's not a real ger yet, right? He's not going to be a real ger until he becomes a gadol, and actually is makabel or mitzvahs upon himself. Now that it's efshar, he has to do it, and that's ma'akev, the chalos of the geros. And that's why he says the nafkamin of the Ger Katan is mago b'yayin kasher. We're makel on a derabanan level that we treat the kid as if he's a Jew, but lamaisa, like on a deraisa level, the person is not actually Jewish. Of course, on a derabanan level, he's quote unquote supposed to keep all the mitzvahs. The reason why I put that in quotes is because since he's a katan, he's not chayiv on a deraisa level anyway in mitzvah. Even if he was born Jewish, he wouldn't be chayiv in deraisa. But we certainly would have to keep the mitzvahs and all that. But the nafkamina l'kula is that idea of mago b'yayin would be kasher. Yesterday we began then also to get into the discussion what kind of motivation and what kind of drive has to be there for the person to be a ger. We were looking at the Gemaras in Yavamas and the Kavdal, which spoke about the idea of being magayer l'shem ishos for totally ulterior motives. Where the Gemara had, according to many Rishonim, seemed to have a machlokes whether or not that gerus, could be good. And once again, we saw the surprise was that according to those who feel that there is a machlokes, right, that was the discussion that we had yesterday between the Ritva and the Mordechai and those Gemaras, where the Ritva had a line where he seemed to say, well, we're not really saying that even the Mandarma that says halacha kulam gerim, what he means to say is that we assume that there probably was some kind of a Kabbalah that was there. And the mashmos was, even though in practice we haven't seen it yet, right? And on the other hand, we saw the Mordechai who said the only time anyone's makel to say that the gerus would be good is going to be if we see that they were miyashir darcheyem, that they actually were walking in a proper derech. In other words, if you see in practice that the gerus actually worked, that they were actually functioning like Shomri mitzvahs, keeping the halachas, fine. So we're going to allow that gerus to go through, even though the motivation behind it was not really totally the shem shemayim. Okay, so that was a machlokes I understand in that Gemara. We didn't really touch upon yesterday, but I'll just throw out there quickly the comment to the Tosis himself on that Gemara in Yavamas Daf Kavdal. And Stam is an interesting Tosis to read, and we're going to focus just on where Tosis points out, famous Gemaras. He quotes the Gemara in Shabbos that everyone knows the story of Hillel. The Who does to the Kami, the Hillel Amar Gayurini, Amanas Lasas Kohen Gadol. I want to be a Kohen Gadol right today. So I want all the kavod that's there that you could possibly have as being a Jew. Right? Shammai did one thing, Hillel does the other thing. And Tosa says that also sounds like a ridiculous reason to be Megayer. There's no L'Shem Shemayim. He's not trying to to actually quote unquote be Jewish. Tosa says no, that can only work. But Tuach Hillel the Sofa Lasos L'Shem Shemayim. Hillel knew that Sofa Lasos L'Shem Shemayim, that he was going to go for it. Now, that's a very interesting line in Tosas also that I want to point out, to our attention. A fascinating line in Tosas. Again, I sort of hope that you can chime in on this one over here. So let's unmute ourselves. What's interesting about that line in Tosas? Batuach Haya Hillel the Sofa Lasos L'Shem Shemayim.
How are you so certain? How do you know?
Okay, that's interesting. But give me something more interesting.
that you need to be, that it has to, that you have to know that he's going to actually hold it up in order for him to be a ger.
Okay, so give me the word that I want you to focus on. Let's give me. You're going in a good direction. Give me there's one word that's very interesting. Huh?
Batuach.
No.
Sofo.
Huh?
Sofo.
Sofo. What's interesting about that line?
Because it's at the end.
Because you're saying that it doesn't have to be at the time; it just has to be at the end of the day.
So Eli, now you said that as a statement. I'm going to ask that as a sarach ion of Mentosa. What exactly does Tosas mean when he says that Sofo lasos l'shem shemayim? Right? Does that Sofo mean he's megayah without any actual kabbalas or mitzvos? Right? But mistama, after he gets into things and he goes to a couple of events, singles things at the shul, whatever it is, and someone's going to chap him, and all of a sudden, he's going to end up, he's for sure going to get turned on, and for sure going to get, whatever, send him on a birthright trip, and he'll get into it, or whatever it is. It's sort of like what they do, like in American Jewish education. Eventually, you get to Eretz Yisrael, and Sofo, you'll be doing things like from whatever it is, and actually be from for the first 12 years, and we give you a break. So is that what we mean? But Sofo lasos l'shem shemayim, or does Hillel just mean over here that today, when he first appears and comes to my doorstep to be a ger, we know he's coming with like a silly thing. I want to be a Kohen Gadol, but by the time I'm done with him, by the time we get to the actual gerus itself, that gerus is going to be l'shem shemayim. That's not 100% clear, like what the Tosas means by that phrase. Sofo lasos l'shem shemayim. So we're also going to put that on a little bit of a hold right now when we start to see what the approach of the different poskim, excuse me, and Rishonim is going to be. So let's start off. The most tricky one of the Rishonim over here is going to be the Rambam. And the Rambam has like a speech over here. There's mamish like a whole like droning. I don't want to say drone because the Rambam doesn't drone. Because every word is always meduyak, but there's a lot that the Rambam has to say over here. And when we read carefully, there are different, perhaps even conflicting diukim at times that are going to make it a little bit interesting to try to work out one cohesive approach that the Rambam has to the world of gerus. So let's quickly take a look through the Rambams. We're going to read them together, and we're going to also highlight some of the key lines. Now, Perek Yud Gimel of Hilchos Isurei Bia introduces the idea of gerus. Okay, at the beginning of the Perek in Halacha Aleph, the Rambam brings on the Shlosha Devarim Nichnasu Yisrael, the bris, the Mila, Tefillah, the Korban. There are three things that Klal Yisrael does or did at the time of Har Sinai to be Nichnas Labris. They had a Mila, a Tefillah, and the Korbanos that were brought at Har Sinai. Right? The Rambam goes on. I'm just introducing what you need to know for right now. Mila Hoisa b'Mitzrayim. The Mila was in Mitzrayim at the time of the Korban Pesach. Okay? And that's how they entered into the bris with the Rebbeinu Shalom. Tevila was Bamidbar Kodem Matan Torah. That's an Halacha Gimel of Perek Yud Gimel. Okay? And then the Rambam in Halacha Dalid says as follows: V'chein ledoros. The same thing is true for all generations. Kishi yirtza goy lehikanis lebris listof v'tachas kanfei hashchinu v'kabel olav ol Torah. Listen to the words that we just used, right? When the goy comes and he wants to be nichnas into the bris with Klai. So we had this Rambam last week. We read this part, right? He wants to be mistofev tachas kanfei hashchina. He wants to dwell tachas kanfei hashchina v'yakabel olav ol Torah, and he wants to be makabel ol Torah. So what does he have to do? Sorech mila tefila. V'artzah's korban, he has to have a mila, tefillah, and he has to have a ritzu. He has to appease the Rebbeinu Shalom with a korban. One second, please. Leave the room. So what's very interesting about that line? What's very interesting about that line in the Rambam, right, is that the Rambam divides the gerus into two things. So you just listen. I know you have it in front of you. Just try to follow what we're reading now. I'm going to read the words again. The same thing is true. We follow the pattern of what they did in Mitzrayim and Har Sinai for all generations. Kishayirtza goy likanis the bris, when the goy wants to join the bris, the covenant of and the destiny of Klal Yisrael, v'yakabel olav old Torah, and when he wants to be makabel the old Torah. So I'm going to pause for a second, not actually pause the recording, but pause for a second. What's interesting, right, is that the Rambam definitely speaks about the words Yekabel Alav Old Torah, right? Except when the Rambam speaks about Yekabel Alav Old Torah, he's not yet speaking about the process of the Geirus, the Maisa Geirus. He's talking about something that precedes the Geirus, the Ratzon that the candidate has to be Magayer. We're still talking about the stage where the guy is, I'm going to read the words again, Yirtza Goy Likanis the Bris, Yikabel Olav Old Torah. He wants to be Nichnas the Bris. He wants to be Makabel Torah. How does he do it? Torah Mila Tfila V'Artzaz Korban. Right? So what's interesting is in that presentation of the process of Geirus, of the actual Maisa Geirus, how do you do the Geirus? The Rambam doesn't say the Ger needs to be Makabel all mitzvos, right? Because that idea was before the Maisa Geirus took place. He already wants to be Makabel Old Torah. So what does he do now? Right? He needs the Geirus has to be the Mila Tfila and the Korban that he has to bring. So let's point out. We're going to make a list of a lot of the different lines in the Rambam that he says, and a lot of the the what's the I word I'm looking for? Not in this. I'm forgetting the word. Okay, but the way the Rambam is gonna give us different understandings, different implications about the Geirus. Here he definitely does not say the Kabbalah's all mitzvos is a part of the formal process of the Maisa Geirus. Okay, we're going to jump back to the Rambams that we are actually reading. For us over here, at the end of Perek Yud Gimel. So the Rambam says something fascinating. We're going to read through all of them. That these are beautiful Rambams. Al Yaila Daitecha Sheshimshon Moshiach Yisrael Shlomo Melech Yisrael Shenikra Yedidya Nasu Nashim Nachrios Bigayusam. Don't think for a second that Shimshon Agibor, who was the savior of Klal Yisrael, don't think that Shlomo Melech Yisrael, who was called Yedidya, the beloved of Hashem himself, don't think that they married Nashim Nachrios Bigayusam. Don't think that they married non-Jewish women. It sounds like that in the Tanakh. Don't think that's true, the Rambam says. Elasoda Dover Kachu. Let me explain to you how to understand properly the psukim and the episodes that are presented in the Tanakh. Says the Rambam, Mitzvah Nechona, the proper way of doing things is Kishiyavo Ager or Giyoris Liizgayer. When the candidate comes to be Magayer, Bodkim Acharo. We check. Shema beglal mamon sheyitol or bishvil svarash sheyizkila. Maybe he's thinking of getting some money to be Magayer. Maybe he was thinking of some position that he's going to merit to have after he's Magayer, like the Kohen Gadol of Hillel. Or mipnei hapachad bali kanisada. So he's coming to join Yiddishkeit because of pachad. That was the story of the Geri Mordechai Esther that we discussed yesterday in Yavamas Kavdalit. You check into what's his motivation. Im ishu bodkem acharav shema einav nasan beishu Yehudis. Im ishehi shema einav nasan babachur mebuchura Yisrael. Depending on the gender, check out what his interest is. Baruch Hashem, the Rambam lived at a time where you don't have to say if he's a man, maybe he wants to marry a Jewish man, or it's on so on and so forth. Right? We didn't get up to that yet. So you check into like what was your story? So im lo nimselehem ila. If you don't find any fishy stuff, no scraggly things. Modium oso kovet ola Torah. You teach them about the weight of what Torah is about. The Torah sheyesh ba'asiyasa al amei haaretz, and you teach them about the Torah. You teach them about the difficulty, the tircha that the amei haaretzos face when it comes to keeping mitzvahs. So Talmid Chacham, it's a lot of difficult times with keeping it. And you tell them, hey, do you want a kadesh yifreshu in order to encourage him to back away? Okay, so let's now look what we have over here. Says the Rambam, right, and the way we line things up right now. If the motivation is funny, we didn't get up to the first base, right? But if the motivation was okay, right, in lo nimselem ilaf, there's nothing scraggly there. So then we come and say, okay, let me now try to push you off a little bit. There's an ol of Torah. There's a kovet, a weight that the mitzvahs are going to put upon you. Are you ready to live up to all of that stuff. Okay, but what's important is that over here the Rambam is very, very clear, right? That we're introducing to the ger. Do you understand that what you're about to do involves mitzvot, right? It involves responsibilities that are there. Okay, im kiblo below pirsho, if he passes that next hurdle, right? And if the Rambam if the ger goes through anyway, v'ro osam, where am I? And we see that that they're being choser from their bad ways, choser from the goyishkeit. Me'ava, and they say, no, I love the Ribono Shel Olam, I love emes, and that's why I want to go. Mekabelim also. Then we say, you know what? Remekabel, Yeshanemar, etc. And we quote a pasuk from the Megillas Rus. Okay, that's the introduction. Lefikach lo kiblu bezdin geirim kol yimei David v'Shlomo. That's why in the times of David and Shlomo, they weren't Makabel Gerim. Bimei David Shema Min Apachar Chazru. Bimei Shlomo Shema Bishvil Malchus Vatova Gedola Shahoyu Ba Yisrael Chazru. Maybe when it came to Shlomo's time, they were just very excited about the coolness of what it meant to be part of the nation that was on top of the world. I'm skipping. Actually, let's read on a little bit more. Shekol Achozim because anyone who wants to leave his goyish life, b'shvil davar may have for some silly olam hazadik thing. Listen carefully to the words of the Rambam. Eino megeirei hatzedek. Now, very quickly, make a little diuk for me over here in that lashon of the Rambam. Unmute and say something.
Otherwise, they are gerim.
Okay, short and sweet. Thank you, Eli. Right, the Rambam says that the people who are leaving Goyishkeit, trying to enter Yiddishkeit, okay, for ulterior motives, not l'shem shamayim, their problem is there ain't no megeri at tzedek, right? But leaving room open for the possibility that there's some other category called a ger who's not a unmute again. A ger who's not a okay, ger who's not a ger tzedek. Okay, very good. V'afa pikein hoyu gerim harbim is gerim b'mei davar shalom b'fnei hadyotos. Says the Rambam, but you got to be aware of one little historical fact that even b'mei davar b'shlomo, when the official rule was not to be makabel gerim because of the concern that it was mistama, they weren't doing things for really the l'shem shamayim motives, but b'fnei hadyotos in front of they made up of exactly like the word implies, hadyotos, which is translate that into English. And it rhymes, so the people in Makabel get him anyway. But Bezin I go to Choshishim lahim. Lo dochem osam achash tablo. The Bezin I go to the Talmid Chacham in the Sanhedrin. They reject them because achash tablo. They did it. They went through a gerus. When we come welcome lo makarvim osam adjective some. We're not going to makariv them. Not clear what that expression means. We're not going to draw them in. Because we have to see what's going to be at the end. Let's see how they're going to turn out. Okay. Now again, what is not so clear with that line in the Rambam, and that's why it has to be very, very underlined over here. Right. That the Beis Din Gadol, even at the time when he officially were not in the capital Gerim, right? There was this thing of he said, I don't know. What's their story? We're not marchik them, but we're not makari them, right? We don't kick them out and say, go back to church, because the Maisa, as the Rambam says, they had a tefillah. Pashut reading is saying that there was a Maisa Gerus, like they went through the motions. They went through the motions of the Gerus. But on the other hand, the Rambam is very, very clear that we have to see where they're going to be. So what exactly is the status of a ger who we don't know what his story is, we're not sure where he's holding, right? So maybe we can once again look back to Eli's deal of the idea of maybe perhaps he's not a ger tzedek, right? On the other hand, there's some status, that's there. What is that? We don't know yet. We're just pointing out the words that are here in the Rambam. Halacha Tezayin. Let's read on some more important phraseology. Because both Shlomo HaMelech and Shimshon HaGibor were Megayer their Nashim before they married them. But it's also understood and known that those women that were Megayer, were not Megayer the Shimshon. There was some ulterior motive that was there. And they weren't Mizgayer in front of the actual Bezdin. As the Rambam points out, the last line, it was Shlomo, Shimshon, they were the ones that went and pushed the keyboard. So Chashman HaKasav, Kilu Goyos will be Surah Hamdim. Now, interesting line. The Torah treats it as if they were Goyim, right? And they're still Asr. We treat it as if they're Asr. And not only that, the Rambam says, but at the end of the day, we actually saw Shein Ovdos Avodah Zarah Shalehem, Bana Lehem Abamas, Vehela Alava Kasav Kilu Hubanan, Shenemar Oz Yivne Shlomo Abamas. But not only that, we saw the end that Shlomo Melech's Noshim Bas Paro, right, was Bona Abama, right? Shitaka went back to Avodah Zarah. The kever of Bas Paro is sitting outside of the old city in Yerushalayim. You can go and see it and visit. I don't know if we did it this year with you guys, but if not, we were going to do it in the upcoming weeks on Yom Yerushalayim, so maybe next year we'll do that. But as the Rambam says over here, so those particular people were viewed by the Torah as if they were, in very short words, as if they were Goyim, the Suran owned him, okay? And not only that, you see Lamaisa that's what happened. So what we need right now to point out over there, in that line in the Rambam, right, which is very, very important to us, is that on the one hand, the Rambam is saying is he began with the Halacha Dalet. Don't think they married Nachrios. Don't think they married Goyim. Right? Says that because they were Megayer them. Okay? So that was enough, according to the Rambam, to use the word justify. Okay? It was enough, according to the Rambam, to justify the fact that Shlomo HaMelech, Shimshon HaGibor, married the people that they married. But what was their status? So the Rambam, after explaining this, and the Rambam, after presenting this interesting category of that you're not a ger tzedek, but you're a something that we're not makariv, that we're not marchik. Okay, so the Rambam tells us also that they married machios, but they definitely married people like very dubious kind of a standing in terms of where exactly they were at in their geros. It seems to be clear when the Rambam says "Hochiach sofan al tchilasan" that your impression is that the Rambam is saying they are what? There's another one of those unmute and say something moments.
Nevertheless, they would be Megayer.
Sitting here until someone responds.
Nevertheless, they would be Megayer.
When the Rambam says Hochiach Sofan Al Tchilas, they were actual. I'm picking on Shlomo Pasek now. Shlomo, you're my guy. Pasek, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can I hear you? Well, there we go. Tchias has something. Tchias a picture. So when Rambam says Hochiach Sofan Al Tchilas, what's he coming to say? That they were Gerim or not Gerim?
They are Gerim.
Gerim or Goyim?
They're Gerim, no?
Whoa! Just the opposite. Shlomo, look inside the Rambam again, right? Hochiach Sofan Al Tchilasam was that Shehein Ovdos of Zarah Shalahen Bana Lehem Bama. They actually made right Mizbeach that was also to do Hela Allah because of Kilu Hubanam. And we treated like Shlomo Melech himself did that chait of being makriv on the Bama. Right? In other words, the Rambam's line is Hochiach Sot Chilas and Shehein Ovdos of Avodah Zarah Shalahen. They stuck with their Avodah Zarah. So what is this time the Rambam is driving at? When he says they stuck with their Avodah Zarah,
That's
Shlomo, you still on?
Yeah. Yeah. That they're not Jewish. That if they stuck to their avodah zarah. Oh.
Pastor, you made him leave.
Rabbi just left.
Oh, he's back. Okay.
He's back.
I missed your presentation. My computer went bad. Shlomo, what did you say again?
That they're not Jewish.
One more time.
That they're not Jewish if they.
That they were. It sounds like they weren't doing so well. The rabbi says, right, that idea that you see Labaisa, that at the end of the day, they went back to see at the end of the day they went back to acting not Jewish and doing avodah zarah. You actually seem to see the Rambam says that they were actually problematic. Now let's go on. There's a little bit more in the Rambam over here, right? Which is and a couple more tricky lines. Halacha Yudzayin, Ger Shelo Bodku Acharov. Right? We learned the process before that you're supposed to check into the Ger, what was his story. But let's say if a Ger Shelo Bodku Acharov. He didn't check. O Shelo Hodiuhu Mitzvos Va'onsha. Okay? That's going to be a very, very key line in the Rambam. Lo Hodiuhu Mitzvos Va'onsha. You didn't tell him, inform him about the mitzvos. But Mol V'Tovo B'fnei Shloshe Hediotos, and he went in front of a bezdin that wasn't the most appropriate bezdin, and he went through the process of Mila, the process of Gerus rather, the Mila having Tefillah. Harei a Ger, okay, that's still a Ger. Even if we know that there was some Bishvil Davar Hu Mizgayer, there was some ulterior motive that was there. Why is he still a Ger? Hoil or Mal V'Taval Yatsa Miklal Hagoyim. Since he was Mal V'Taval, okay, he went through the process, the Maisa of Gerus. The Rambam now has another phrase. He's Yatsa Miklal Hagoyim. He's right exactly as that expression, exactly as that expression implies. V'Chosheshim Lo Achi is Boyer Tzidkuso. We're Choshesh, in other words, we suspect this person until we put him in a little what do you call it? A little what's the word we're looking for? Some little trial period that's there until you see what his level of tzidkus is. Shekidusha kiddushin u'mitzvah lahachzir avidaso me'acher shel toval nasa ki Yisrael. And the Rambam here seems to, as we say, mineu bei. We put him in this little probation period where we're not sure what his story is. But again, look back at the first expression in the Rambam. Right? We were lohu diuhu amitzos. We have no idea what the guy thinks Yiddishkeit is about, but he went through the process, Mila and Tevila. We put him on probation a little bit. The Rambam says he was Yatsa Miklal Hagoyim. Okay, but listen to the next line. When we see that he messes up, when we see that he's Choser v'Oved Avodah Zarah, the Rambam says his din right now is not that he's a goy, but his din right now is that he's considered a Yisrael Meshumer. Okay, a Meshumer, a guy who's a Mumer, and Apikora, someone went off the derech. His Kiddushin is still a Kiddushin. There's still a mitzvah Sholas Aveda because he's still Jewish. As the Rambam says, Me'achesh Tovel, he's Nasir Ki Yisrael. So the issue that's there, of course, coming back to what Shlomo was just explaining to us a couple of minutes ago, right, is that in the previous halacha, the Rambam seemed to say that when it came to the wives of Shlomo and Shimshon, they went off the derech, and when we had them on probation, we saw that the taka went off, and it wasn't so great what they did. So the Torah treats it as if they married Goyim, as if they married Nachrios, right? Here the Rambam is telling us when we were lo hodiyu mitzvos at all, right? When we know that we weren't bodik achareim, and we saw that there was a davar acher, that their intentions were for some other not l'shem shemayim reasons. he speaks about the Yatsa Miklal Goyim, which sounded that might fit with the previous Agdara, with the previous definitions. You're not quite a real Jew, but you're at least Yatsa Miklal Goyim. That would have maybe gone with Eli's diak before. You're not a Ger Tzedek, but you're something, right? But in the end of this halacha, the Rambam tells us, that's why there's a lot of just back and forth lines that are here. In the end of this Rambam, the Rambam tells us that even though you went off the derech, even though he became a Meshumad, he's still a Jew, Kiddush of Kiddushin, and he was Nasir Yisrael by virtue of the fact that he went through the process of the Gerus. And the Fikach, Kimon, Shimshon, V'Shlomo, and Shusayim, Afal Pisha Nigla Sodan, and even though Shimshon and Shlomo's wives eventually showed their true colors, but that's why they stayed married to them, because Lamaisa, they were considered Jewish because of the Gerus that they went through. Okay, so in the ultimate, we'll call defense of Shlomo Melech and Shimshon Agi, where the Rambam is saying that Nasa Yisrael, there was some baseline, maybe not the best Gerus in the world, when we are calling them out on that there's no question about it. The Tanakh is very, very clear that there was something wrong with what they did, but the Rambam is trying to explain that it wasn't like a outright wrong, wasn't a blatant outright bad that was committed. They were Lamai, so they were again, that does seem so what you to present like we've been trying to build up over here. A very, very, we're going to call it funny kind of a picture. We're not really sure what the status of the Ger who is a lower Hodiyu of mitzvahs. He didn't teach him about the mitzvahs. They had ulterior motives. Like, so the Rambam is still speaking about some kind of not clear category that was there. Again, the Tanakh is definitely pointing a finger at Shlomo Melech and Shimshon and saying that they married Nachrios, right? The Rambam is trying to mitigate that a little bit by saying they weren't real Nachrios. They were just, not the best Gerim, that were there. That kind of a status is a little bit elusive to us, right? Because what does that mean if they were Jewish, and then that's fine. If they weren't, then that's in their case that wasn't so fine, for us. It should have been a yes or no, kind of a question. The Rambam's opening up of a category of a Ger Tzedek versus just he was Yatsa Miklal Goyim, right? So where is he? On the other end, the Rambam, after speaking about Yatsa Miklal Goyim, still adds another line that even the people that didn't have the best Gerus, they were Naseh Ki Yisrael, right? And what of course is interesting, one more last little diuk in those words of the Rambam. Maybe someone else other than Eli Levy can help us out over here. What's interesting about that line, I'm just going to help you out myself actually, but someone just say it and pretend this is your own diuk. What does the phrase Naseh Ki Yisrael sound like it's saying?
Kit Yisrael. He's like Yisrael.
It makes it sound like they're not actually Israeli.
Okay, so now again, certainly a correct diak. I'm glad you noticed that, even without me pointing that out to you. But what of course is once again interesting to you, right, or at least to me, but I think to you also, is that that expression of your Ki Yisrael, right, is also not 100% clear, right? So if I'm going to ask, I don't know, whoever else that we know, I can't see over there, Seabag, you still with us? Do you exist? I just unmuted Aaron TV. I can't believe I'm doing this. It's like dangerous for all of us, but I'm unmuting Aaron Seabag for now. Can you be unmuted? Why can't you be unmuted? That's fascinating. When we don't want you to talk, you don't stop. When we are trying to get you to talk, but anyway, you listen to the recording if it's not working. Lamaisa, but no one's told me that's not working either, though. But Lamaisa, that category being a Ki Yisrael is also a little bit strange. So the kitzer of everything we're being medayik. I see we're all moving again now. The kitzer of what we're being medayik over here in the Rambam is that it's very, very not clear what exactly the Rambam is presenting to us in terms of what is absolutely necessary for a gerus. And is it possible to have a gerus without a Kabbalah's old mitzvahs. Again, where the Rambam fits in the discussion we're having between the Ritva, the Shita Yashana, the Mordechai that we saw yesterday in Maseches Yevamos about the need of Kabbalah's old mitzvahs, things that are not 1,000% clear, which we're going to try to make some heads and tails out of over here as we're learning along. So we're going to put the Rambam to the side just for a second and discuss that and discuss some of the ideas that the Gedolei Halamdanim have given us throughout the years, how to understand and appreciate what the sheet of the Rambam is. Okay. The like we mentioned yesterday, when we were discussing, we were introducing the reason why this topic of Kabbalah's Ol Mitzvahs is so significant. So we definitely mentioned the idea that in today's climate, there's a lot of movement to have gerus without actual practical Kabbalah's Ol Mitzvahs, right? Again, if anyone can't hear me, and I can see if you just shake your heads a little bit to note that you just heard that, I appreciate that. So the idea that there are people, rabbis, rabbanim, that are advancing an agenda that the fact that we think, we know that the people's commitment to Torah mitzvahs is not so genuine, and it's not going to happen. So some definitely are saying, yeah, but who cares? It doesn't really matter so much, right? You just have to be magayer them, and what they're going to do doesn't really matter. We should be aware, okay, that this Rambam that we just read is definitely the flag that they're all flying, where they say, you see that the Rambam tells us, okay, it might be like the best gerus in the world. Maybe that's not the girl that you want to marry, but but it worked. Shlomo wasn't such a bad guy. He's like, he did that. Kabbalah's Ol Mitzvahs is not so important and not so relevant. Okay, and what we're going to be showing now is the actual Gedolei Torah and the Lamdanim have pointed out that is far from correct in the understanding of what the Rambam is. When we start to look through some of the halachas and Shulchan Aruch, also we'll see very clearly. I just put in front of you, this is a famous Mari Makam in the world today about the concept of gerus. Is this this footnote in an essay called "The Kol Dodi Dofek," Kol Dodi Dofek by Rav Soloveitchik Zatzal. Kol Dodi Dofek was an essay that the Rav Soloveitchik had wrote about the events of modern history, the transition from the years of World War II into the founding of the state of Israel. He speaks of it. Kol Dodi Dofek is a pasuk of course in Shir Shirim that my beloved is knocking on the door, and the Rav Soloveitchik in his own beautiful way discussed 6 defikos, 6 knocks that Klal Yisrael heard in the past, in what we're going to call now the past 70, really 80 years, when he speaks about years of Jewish history, in passing, again, you can read it on your own. It's available. We're not going to go through it right now, but he somehow or another segues into some concepts relating to the idea of gerus. One of the things that he speaks about, because they're very interesting ideas actually, is the concept of what we're going to call Jewish destiny. The idea that he speaks about being part of the nation of Klal Yisrael. He always spoke about the covenant. If you want to be being part of the bris of Klal Yisrael, is having a common destiny. We're all in it together. What happens to Jews is a certain sense of shared destiny that's there, but there's also a purpose and a vision that governs Klal Yisrael. So not only Jews, the people that sometimes are the brunt of attacks and oppression and all of that, but you also not just have that destiny, but there's the vision and the purpose of what Klal Yisrael is meant to do here in the world. Rav Soloveitchik, in a very, very pretty way, this is not the topic of this particular footnote, spoke about the idea of Mila and Tevila in Gerus represents those 2 ideas. Mila, as we read in the Rambam before, took place in Mitzrayim, right? And Mitzrayim was the place where Klal Yisrael shared a very, very common, what we called a second ago, destiny, insofar as the oppression, all the things we read about in the Haggadah recently, the Shibud that was there in Mitzrayim that we all went through together, and we commemorated that, and we we joined together in that collective destiny through the act of Mila that we did in Mitzrayim. But the Tefillah that was done at Har Sinai, which was the prerequisite for the Kabbalah Satorah at Har Sinai, was the concept of not the destiny, but the purpose and the direction that Klal Yisrael was going to undergo through the Kabbalah Satorah. And every single Gerus that goes through, the Ger is being Makabel. He also quoted, of course, the famous expression that Rusa Movia used, Amech Ami ve'elokayach elokai. Your nation is my nation, your God is my God, like showing those two parts that are there in every Gerus. Amech Ami ve'elokayach elokai. Now, in this particular footnote, the Rav Soloveitchik points out, he alerts us to this Rambam, and lets us run through it very, very quickly. He says, look in the Rambam Per Gimel Halacha Yuzayin Ger Shelo Batko Acharav Shelo Hudiyu Mitzvos VeOnsham, but he was Mal V'Taval Hareze Ger. Okay, so Soloveitchik quotes over here from his father. My father Moshe Soloveitchik, the Gram Soloveitchik, had said, "Ki Rambam lo niskaven lo mesheger shnes ger manash lo lekayim mitzvos hari hu ger." The Rambam, of course, Ramosha Soloveitchik explained, did not ever entertain the possibility, intending not to be Mekayim mitzvos, is actually a ger. Dover kazei kakei as a kol, as kol inyan negeras a kedushas Yisrael mismatzi b'chavosein lekayim mitzvos shel Kadosh Baruch Hu. Such a concept would totally undermine the very concept of what Yiddishkeit, what Kedushas Yisrael is about, which is summarized through the chiyuvim that we have, the mekayim of the mitzvahs of Hashem. It's a lo yitachin, it's a non-starter. Ramosha Soloveitchik explained, to have gerus without mitzvahs. But explain to Soloveitchik a very interesting line over here. Again, hopefully you got through this. Sheshitas Rambam hi ki ein kabbalas mitzvos mahava pu'ulam yuchedes begerus has kukal bezin kamot tefillah. As we already pointed out both yesterday and today, the Rambam was very, very clear that the only time you need the Bezdin to be observing the Maisa Gerus was in the actual Maisim, in the formal process of Gerus. And the formal process of Gerus is there in the Tefillah for sure, the Mila and the Tefillah. Again, it's one of the things that Rav Soloveitchik discussed in the earlier parts over here is whether or not the Mila is a part of the Maisa of Gerus, or is the Mila what we call the Milas Yisrael. He's just doing the Mila as a mitzvah that every other Jew does, but the Mila itself is not actually part of the process of the Gerus. Again, that's a discussion that it's actually Machlokes, the Rambam Ramban, what the role of the Mila is in the Gerus, but for sure the Tefillah is the Iker Maisa that's there of the Gerus. So he says, Kabbalah's O Mitzvahs is not part of the formal process of how do I do the process of Gerus, but the Kabbalah's O Mitzvahs, as he says, is the very prerequisite, the foundation of what a Gerus is all about. So we are aware that the Ger is interested in Torah and mitzvos, and that's why he's going through the process of Gerus, which is represented by the Tefillah. We never went through the process, or I should rephrase it, even if we never went through the process of informing him of the mitzvos right now, and we never heard that the Ger said, as he's going into that mikvah, I'm being makabel mitzvah. So at the moment of the actual formal process, that transition that the Gerus represents, that can be totally fine. The Tefillah is mo'ila, the Tefillah helps, it works, kevan sheger mizkabin lichios chaim kedoshim she Yisrael kasher, as long as the Ger knows what he's getting into. Again, he shares that sense of purpose and identity with Klal Yisrael. Tosfos, though, learned a little bit differently. Yesterday we pointed out that Tosfos holds that you have to have the Iker Bezdin is there for the Kabbalah's O Mitzvos. Tosfos holds ki sovrim hema she Kabbalah's O Mitzvos he chalos miuchedes betalichos. Tosfos apparently holds that the Kabbalah's O Mitzvos is in fact part of the formal process of the Gerus, and therefore the Kabbalah Mitzvos requires a Bezdin, because we're watching a Maiseh within the Maiseh Gerus, not just the basic definition and the underlying purpose of the Gerus. Eina tvila zekuka lebezin rakabolas o mitzvos tzricha liskayim b'fneim. As the Rambam explains, right, that the tvila requires the bezin. According to Tosas, the tefillah itself doesn't require a bezin because the kabbalas o mitzvos, that's what has to be done in front of bezin because that's the ikar part of the maisa of the gerus. So once again, the way Rav Soloveitchik explained the discussion over here was to make a chiluk between the Rambam and the Tosas. Everyone agrees that you have to have an actual kabbalas o mitzvos. There's no concept of gerus without that shared destiny and purpose of what being a Jew is about. The Kedushas Yisrael as expressed through the Asher Kedushono b'mitzvosav, the Tzivano, without the Tzivuyim, there's no such concept of Kedushas Yisrael. The Asher Kedushono b'mitzvosav is necessary to have a person be part of Klal Yisrael, and that's a given. The only debate is whether or not the Kabbalas or Mitzvos is a part and parcel of the formal Maisa Geiros, but whether or not the Kabbalas or Mitzvos is the, like we said, we're a little reluctant to use the word prerequisite, but we're going to use that expression anyway right now, but is that the prereq or the condition that's there behind the Geiros. Now, Lord Salvation did not discuss over here, which Baruch Hashem left for us to do on our own, which we will certainly see other inyanim in the Rambam right now. But of course, we didn't explain what that we're going to call that strange in between twilight zone status of Gerus is that the Rambam seems to be presenting. Again, Kabbalas o mitzvos is a necessity, right? And without that, there's nothing there. And as we pointed out in the beginning parts of the Rambam, just to draw our attention back to there, in the very beginning of the Perek Yud Zayin, right? The Rambam spoke about Gerus doesn't start without the Ger coming. And I just want to read the words of the Rambam one more time. Sorry, I just have the wrong Rambam open in front of me. As the Rambam writes over here, right? Kishi yirtze hagoy lihikanis labris yikabel ol Torah. When the goy wants to be nichnas labris, when they want to be makabel ol Torah, that's where you have the Maisa Geras of the Mila and the Tefillah. Right. So the way Ramosha Soloveitchik and Rabbi Yoshe Ber were explaining over here, right, with the idea of course, the ger has to have, as the Rambam starts in the beginning, he has a ratzon to be mekabel ol mitzvos, and the only thing the Rambam was describing later on was we call the exact process of the gerus. So if we were lo hodiuhu the mitzvos at the shasa gerus itself, that already could be okay as long as we have an understanding of what the interest of the ger was when he was going and being Megayer. Okay, that's the first part of the Rambam. Now, we're going to start off, even though we don't really totally have enough time to finish, but trying to analyze and dissect the Rambam a little bit more over here, like we said, because there are some open question marks, open ends in terms of what this this kind of a status is that the Rambam is describing. So here we're going to look back to an exchange between the two great Dayanim of Lita, Reb Chaim Ozer Zatzal and the Devar of Ram. And again, for a lot of us in this year right now, we're thinking back to some very, very fond memories of traversing the length and breadth of Lita. Of course, the Devar of Ram was the Kavna Rav. And if you look carefully in Binyamin Weiner's a picture on his screenshot over there, you have us all standing there in the shul on Kavna, which of course the Devar Rambam visited, but he wasn't the actual Rav of that shul. We saw a nice picture of him over there, and visited his kever there shortly afterwards. And it was also one of our first great breakfasts, like sitting there hugging in the back of the shul. And then of course, we both went to the house and to the kever of Chaim Ozer in Vilna, the kever on the first night when we were there in Vilna, and on Shabbos we visited by Reb Chaim Ozer's house. So let's now once again just remind ourselves who these people. I just think back to what we knew about them. Let's enjoy some of the exchange over here between these two between the two giants, Reb Chaim Ozer and the Devar of Ram. So we're going to start with the Tshuva and Achiezer. Both of these are mega famous, and let's roll. So the Achiezer begins with a question that was asked to him from somebody who it's the shaila was sent from somewhere in the States, and you had somebody who was a very, very typical back in the day, a nachris that was nisei, so the Yisrael b'derech civili, someone who went through a civil marriage with a shiksa, and apparently she was coming to whoever the rabbi was in the place. Again, the Shuvah Nechiyazah doesn't have exactly who was being written to. And again, I just want to remind, because this is one of the fascinating things, remind ourselves what we pointed out then, that the volume of correspondence, of letters that was sent to the Achiezer was so great that people actually did not have a need to address the letters. If you wrote that you were writing sending mail to Chaim Ozer Grozhensky, so even without leaving out the street address, etc., but things were able to make it to his doorstep. So here was a shaila being sent from the good old US of A. What do we do? These are actually ma'asim b'chol yom that these things were taking place. And eventually the girl said, you know what, I'll go through a gerus, but it was clear that her interest was not in Yiddishkeit. Her interest was just in, placating the upset and annoyed grandmother who wanted the kid to marry a Jew. She, again, as many Americans didn't understand at the time, if you don't live a Jewish life, so obviously your kids and I can be interested in marrying Jews and all of that. And what do we do now? This became again a shaila that was asked, unfortunately, thousands of times over in the course of American history. And then you had the little the little extra added package that was there at the beginning of the question, where does the fact matter that if we don't do it, then she's going to end up walking off to be nisgayer through less than kosher means, through our questionable brethren who follow some of the different strains that are out there. So Chaim Ozer says as follows. Let's run through. So I do want to read the truth inside, just to make sure we got all of this. When we deal with inyanim that are relating to halacha l'maaseh, we really have to make sure that we have things as clear as possible. So it says Reb Chaim Ozer, Hinei Yeshli, not so sure about a couple of things. Bofen Shalom is bar lebezdin, v'yesh makom v'yistapik im yesh lo kavana l'shem ishos ima makablim also. So the basic issue over here is, right, is if it's not clear to Bezdin, and there's reasonable doubt that the person's kavana is l'shem ishos, but not l'shem shamayim, on whether or not that gerus means anything. After the davka min is bar lebezdin sheyesham ila acheres ein makablim. On the one hand, we might have said maybe the Bezdin has to know, has to be nisbarer to the Bezdin in a positive way, that there actually is a wrong reason for the gerus. That's where we were saying that we're not going to be makabel. V'ha de bodkim achrav l'chatchila meisveika mishum de kolecha de ikalavuri mevararina ve'en lebezdin l'kabel b'libedika. Maybe the whole idea of wanting to check into what their motivation was, Reb Chaim Ozer explains it, just because of the simple issue. We had this already in the Beis and Ksubis. You should be mavarer. Don't do things without. Remember, we had the discussion. Be mavarer even a svek. It's mutter, but you should be mavarer anyway lechatchila and not be somech on the head of a sveka. So as Reb Chaim Ozer, the same thing here also. Maybe in terms of actually not being makabel, saying no, you can't be magayer. We have to know clearly that the person says, I have no interest in being a shomer mitzvos. But the moment that wasn't articulated, right, it might look like they're not interested. It might sound like they're not interested. But unless it was actually clearly articulated that we're not interested, maybe l'maisa the gerus can work, right? And it's only l'chatchila that we have to be mavara. But heicha shabadku v'lo nizbar lahem v'yesh makom listapish shekavanaso b'leiv v'shalom. But if we look into it and it's just not so clear, we don't really know what they're interested in doing. Maybe we can say deep down, maybe this is a leif shalim, a proper gerus. Given to be the evan halacha to kulam gerim. Maybe after all, the Gemara in Yevamah, as we learned yesterday, says that bidi eved, you have this idea of kulam gerim. Right? Lechatchila ein makabel mason. Lechatchila we don't do it, but lamaisa maybe it works. So heicha de mistapim makabel mason kechol sofik derabanan lahakel. Maybe we have a right to be makel over here. Okay, now after presenting that question, how clear does it have to be to us that the person has intentions l'shem shamayim, or on the other hand, how clear to us that the person has to have no interest in actually living on a practical level with a life of Kabbalah's own mitzvahs and Torah mitzvahs. So Chaim Ozer now presents the question he's going to analyze over here in the tshuva. Now we are officially out of time, so we are also going to officially end for today. How about that? What I think we're going to be doing though tomorrow is I have a feeling we're going to start more towards the beginning. We're going to do things maybe in an opposite way. We're going to start off with continuing. We're going to learn inside some of the inyanim over here together. And because again, I think we're at a point where it is anyway for just to be reading and explaining before things get too complicated, and explain some of the like I said, some of the lamaisa inyanim that are there, and then at the end of Seder tomorrow, we'll leave it to some either questions or or chazara time, so for us to go through all of the rest. So that's all for now. And we are officially going to end this. So I'm turning everybody off. And Hatzlacha, we will see you a little bit later.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Rebbe,
Yeah.
is there any special programming for Lag BaOmer?
The answer is Lag BaOmer in Yisrael, as it always is still a regular day of learning. We normally do allow people to go to Meron for the Hatlaka. People either go at night and they're back in the morning for Seder. Officially, that's the rule this year. Also, if you want to go, figure out a way to do it. Let's be back for Seder tomorrow. In my shir, I have taken guys to Meron. We're planning on doing it after morning Seder, but that part is not going to happen. That's why we send you all the videos of enjoying Meron, that are there. There will be a special Lag BaOmer shir tomorrow. Which the bottom line is if I'm not mistaken, the Gemara in Gittin that Zayin, there's Shimon Bar Yochai, who is our hero of Lag BaOmer. So Shimon that said the famous expression, Shanu Midosai, I want you to learn my Torah in general, but certainly on Lag BaOmer. So we're going to be doing that special programming of having a Lag BaOmer shir, learning a little bit about Shimon Bar Yochai, and some funky, interesting Kabbalah things that go along with that. And that is going to be tomorrow afternoon. Good to go. And I think if Rabbi Elman puts together some kind of we might be having some kind of like a game activity tomorrow also, but I'm not quite sure if that's all worked out yet. So you will be informed along with me what exactly is going on tomorrow. Okay?
All right. Thank you, Rebbe.
Sounds good. Shkar for the post of the live feed on the what do you call it? On the Up to Meron. Hatzlach, we will see you soon.
See you, Rebbe.
Called